Martha Henley stood at her kitchen window, watching the endless wheat fields sway in the autumn wind. The golden stalks stretched toward the horizon like a vast ocean frozen in time. She pressed her weathered palm against the cool glass, her wedding ring clicking softly against the pane. 3 years had passed since Harold's funeral. Yet the silence in their farmhouse still felt heavy and strange. The morning sun cast long shadows across the empty fields, reminding her of all the seasons that had come and gone without her husband's steady presence. Harold used to wake before dawn, humming old hymns as he prepared for another day of farming. Now the only sounds were the creaking of old wood and the distant whistle of trains carrying grain to faraway cities. Martha turned away from the window and walked through rooms that felt too large for one person. The parlor still held Harold's favorite chair, positioned perfectly to catch the afternoon light for reading his farming journals. His coffee cup sat on the side table, unwashed since the morning he never came home from the fields. She had found him there at sunset, peaceful among the corn rows, his heart finally giving out after 72 years of faithful beating. The neighbors had been kind in those first months after the funeral. Casseroles appeared on her doorstep, and the church ladies took turns checking on her. But as time passed, their visits became less frequent. People had their own lives, their own worries. Martha understood this, though it made the quiet days even longer. She made her way to the kitchen and put the kettle on for tea, a ritual that helped mark the passing hours. While waiting for the water to boil, she sorted through the mail that had accumulated on the counter. Bills, advertisements, and a letter from her sister in Denver, asking when she might come for a visit. Martha set it aside, not ready to think about leaving the farm that held so many memories. At the bottom of the pile lay an envelope she had never seen before. The paper was thick and cream-colored, with her name written in elegant handwriting. There was no return address, only a postmark from the county seat. Martha tore it open carefully, revealing a single sheet of matching stationery. The letter was brief but puzzling. It spoke of a safety deposit box that had been rented in her name, though she had never rented one. The writer explained that the annual fee had been paid in advance for many years, but recent changes in banking regulations required her immediate attention. A small brass key was taped to the bottom of the page, along with instructions to visit the Millfield Trust Bank within 30 days. Martha held the key up to the light, studying its intricate design. She had lived in this county her entire life and knew nothing about any safety deposit box. Harold had always handled their banking at the local credit union, keeping their affairs simple and straightforward. This mystery felt like something from another world entirely. The kettle began to whistle, pulling her from her thoughts. She made her tea and sat at the kitchen table, reading the letter again. The bank mentioned in the letter was in Millfield, the county seat about 40 miles away. She had been there only a handful of times in her life, usually for county fair events or to renew her driver's license. As she sipped her tea, Martha tried to think of any connection she might have to Millfield or to this mysterious safety deposit box. Perhaps Harold had known about it and simply never mentioned it. He had been a private man in many ways, though she thought she knew all his secrets. Could there be something he had kept hidden from her all these years? The idea both intrigued and unsettled her. Their marriage had been built on honesty and shared dreams. They had worked side by side to build their life on this prairie farm, facing good years and hard years together. What could possibly be important enough to hide in a distant bank vault? Martha finished her tea and walked to the front porch, settling into the wooden swing Harold had built during their first summer as newlyweds. The afternoon air carried the scent of ripening grain and the promise of approaching winter. From here, she could see the gravel road that led to town, though few vehicles passed this way anymore since the new highway had been built. She closed her eyes and tried to imagine what Harold might say about this mysterious key. He had always been cautious with money, suspicious of banks and lawyers and anyone who made their living with paperwork instead of honest labor. But he had also been curious about puzzles and loved to work through problems until he found their solutions. The sun began to sink toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. Martha realized she had been sitting on the porch for hours, lost in thought about the letter and its implications. She looked down at the key still clutched in her hand, its brass surface warm from her grip. Tomorrow, she decided, she would drive to Millfield and see what this was all about. The harvest was finished, and she had no pressing obligations on the farm. Winter would arrive soon enough, bringing months of isolation and too much time to think. Perhaps this mystery would provide a welcome distraction from the loneliness that had become her constant companion. As darkness settled over the prairie, Martha went inside and began planning her trip to the county seat. She would need to find suitable clothes for visiting a bank, something more formal than her everyday farm attire. The idea of driving such a distance alone made her nervous, but she had managed far more difficult things since becoming a widow. She placed the key on her bedside table and tried to sleep, but her mind kept returning to the letter and its strange message. What secrets might be waiting in that safety deposit box? And why, after all these years, was she being contacted about something she had never known existed? The next morning dawned crisp and clear, with frost coating the grass and farm equipment like powdered sugar. Martha dressed carefully in her navy blue dress, the one she wore to church and special occasions. She braided her silver hair and pinned it into a neat bun, then studied herself in the mirror that had reflected her face for 50 years of marriage. The drive to Millfield took her through small towns and endless farmland, past grain elevators that rose like monuments against the vast sky. Her old Ford truck handled the journey well, though she rarely drove it beyond the local grocery store and church. As the miles passed, Martha felt a mixture of excitement and apprehension building in her chest. Millfield was larger than her hometown but still retained the character of a prairie community. The main street was lined with brick buildings from the early 1900s, their facades showing the careful craftsmanship of another era. The Millfield Trust Bank occupied a corner building with tall windows and an impressive stone entrance that spoke of stability and permanence. Martha parked her truck and sat for a moment, gathering her courage. She had brought the letter and key in her best handbag, along with identification and anything else she thought might be required. The morning sun reflected off the bank's windows, making it difficult to see inside. As she walked toward the entrance, a voice called her name from across the street. Martha turned to see a man approaching, his expression serious and concerned. He appeared to be in his 60s, well-dressed in a suit that suggested professional success. Something about his face seemed familiar, though she could not immediately place him. "Mrs. Henley," he said, extending his hand in greeting. "I'm Thomas Brennan. My law office is just down the street. I was hoping I might have a word with you before you go inside." Martha shook his hand politely, though she remained puzzled by his appearance. "I'm sorry, Mr. Brennan, but I don't believe we've met. How did you know I would be here today?" Thomas Brennan glanced nervously toward the bank, then back to Martha. His eyes held a mixture of concern and something that might have been fear. "Mrs. Henley, I've been watching for you since I heard you might be coming. There are things you should know before you open that safety deposit box. Things that might be better left undisturbed." "I'm afraid I don't understand," Martha replied, her hand instinctively moving to the purse that contained the mysterious key. "What do you know about this matter?" The lawyer looked around as if checking to see who might be listening, then stepped closer. "My father represented certain interests in this county for many years. Before he died, he made me promise to watch for anyone who came asking about that particular box. Mrs. Henley, some secrets are buried for good reasons." Martha felt a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air. "Mr. Brennan, I received a letter telling me about a safety deposit box rented in my name. I have every right to see what's inside it, don't I?" "Legally, yes," Thomas admitted reluctantly. "But Mrs. Henley, I'm telling you, as someone who has lived in this county his entire life, some doors should remain closed. You've built a good life on your farm. You have the respect of your community and the memory of a fine husband. Why risk all of that for something that happened long before you were born?" "Before I was born?" Martha repeated, her curiosity now fully aroused. "Mr. Brennan, what exactly are you trying to tell me?" The lawyer ran his hand through his graying hair, clearly struggling with some internal conflict. "I can't give you details, Mrs. Henley. I wish I could, but I can tell you that what's in that box relates to events from the 1942 during the war years. There were things that happened in this county, business dealings that some people would prefer to keep forgotten." Martha studied his face, noting the genuine concern in his expression. But she also detected something else. Fear, perhaps, or guilt. Mr. Brennan, are you trying to frighten me away from learning the truth about something that apparently involves my family? Your family had nothing to do with it, Thomas said quickly. That's just it, Mrs. Henley. This has nothing to do with you or your late husband. It's ancient history that could hurt innocent people if it came to light now. Then why is there a safety deposit box rented in my name? Martha asked pointedly. If this has nothing to do with me, why am I involved at all? Thomas Brennan looked genuinely pained by the question. I honestly don't know, Mrs. Henley. That's what worries me. Someone wanted you to find that box eventually, but I can't imagine why. The only people who knew about those old arrangements are either dead or... He trailed off, unwilling to complete the thought. Martha felt her resolve strengthening rather than weakening. Whatever secrets lay hidden in that bank vault, someone had intended for her to discover them. The very fact that this lawyer was trying to discourage her only made her more determined to learn the truth. Mr. Brennan, she said firmly, I appreciate your concern, but I've come too far to turn back now. I'm a grown woman who has faced her share of difficulties. I think I can handle whatever's in that safety deposit box. The lawyer stared at her for a long moment, then sighed deeply. I can see you've made up your mind. But Mrs. Henley, I want you to promise me something. When you've seen what's in there, come to my office before you do anything else. Let me explain what I can about the history involved. Promise me that much. Martha nodded, though she made no commitment beyond politeness. I'll consider it, Mr. Brennan. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have business inside. As she turned toward the bank entrance, Thomas Brennan called after her one last time. Mrs. Henley, you'll regret it if you open that box. Some knowledge is more burden than blessing. Martha paused at the bank's entrance and turned back to look at the troubled lawyer. A small smile played at the corners of her mouth as she considered his warning. She had lived her entire life being careful, following the safe path, doing what was expected of a farmer's wife. But Harold was gone now, and she was free to make her own choices, even if they led to regret. Mr. Brennan, she called back, her voice carrying clearly across the street. I've spent 3 years regretting things I didn't do and words I didn't say. I don't think I'm afraid of one more regret. With that, Martha turned and walked through the bank's heavy glass doors, the mysterious key warm in her palm. Behind her, Thomas Brennan stood on the sidewalk, watching her disappear into the building with an expression of deep concern and something that might have been admiration. The bank's interior was hushed and formal, with marble floors and wooden counters polished to a mirror shine. Martha approached the receptionist, a young woman with kind eyes who directed her to the safety deposit box department. Within minutes, she found herself in a small office across from a bank officer who examined her identification and the letter with professional interest. Mrs. Henley, the officer said, this is quite unusual. This box was opened decades ago, and the rental fees have been paid by automatic transfer from an account that was established at the same time. We've been trying to contact the box holder for years, but had no success until this letter was sent. Who established the account? Martha asked, though she suspected the answer would only deepen the mystery. The bank officer consulted his files, frowning slightly. The original paperwork shows it was set up by someone named Elizabeth Henley in 1943. Would that be a relative of yours? Martha's breath caught in her throat. Elizabeth had been Harold's mother, a woman who died when Harold was barely 20 years old. She had never known her mother-in-law, but Harold had spoken of her with great love and respect. What could Elizabeth Henley have placed in this box more than 80 years ago? The bank officer led Martha down a flight of stairs to the vault, a massive steel door that stood open during business hours. Inside, rows of safety deposit boxes lined the walls like a metallic honeycomb. Box number 247 was located in the far corner, smaller than Martha had imagined but somehow more significant because of its humble size. The bank officer inserted his master key, then waited for Martha to use hers. The brass key slid smoothly into the lock, turning with a soft click that seemed to echo through the years. Inside the narrow box lay a single manila envelope, yellowed with age, and sealed with red wax that had hardened into brittle fragments. "I'll give you privacy to examine the contents," the officer said, leading Martha to a small viewing room furnished with only a table and chair. "Take all the time you need, Mrs. Henley." Martha sat alone in the windowless room, staring at the envelope that had waited more than 8 decades for this moment. Her hands trembled slightly as she carefully broke the ancient seal and opened the flap. Inside were several items: a bundle of letters tied with a faded blue ribbon, a small leather journal, a black and white photograph, and what appeared to be official documents bearing government seals. She began with the photograph. A formal portrait of a young woman in 1,940 seconds, dressed standing beside a tall man in military uniform. The woman bore a strong resemblance to Harold's features, confirming this was indeed his mother, Elizabeth. But Martha had never seen the man before, though his eyes held a kindness that seemed familiar. The documents told an extraordinary story. They revealed that during World War II, Elizabeth Henley had secretly worked with a network that helped Jewish refugees escape persecution in Europe. The papers detailed a complex operation that brought families to safety in remote prairie communities, where they could disappear into farming life and begin again. Elizabeth's farm had served as a temporary shelter, and she had risked everything to save lives during humanity's darkest hour. The journal, written in Elizabeth's careful handwriting, provided intimate details of this dangerous work. Entry after entry described families who arrived in the dead of night, exhausted, terrified, but grateful for sanctuary. Elizabeth wrote about teaching refugee children to milk cows and plant seeds, helping them learn English, and watching them slowly transform from frightened survivors into hopeful Americans. One entry particularly moved Martha. "Today, little Sarah Goldstein picked her first tomato from our garden. She held it like a precious jewel, and said it was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. How can something so simple mean so much? I think it is because it represents hope. The promise that if you plant something and tend it carefully, it will grow and flourish. That is what we are doing here, planting hope and tending it until it can flourish on its own." The letters revealed the broader scope of the operation. Elizabeth had corresponded with contacts in major cities, coordinating the movement of refugees and arranging for their eventual resettlement. Many of the letters expressed profound gratitude from families who had found safety through her efforts. Some included photographs of children who had grown up to become doctors, teachers, and business owners, productive citizens who owed their lives to the courage of people like Elizabeth Henley. One letter stood out from the rest, written in 1943 by a man named David Rosenberg. He thanked Elizabeth for saving his family and explained that he was establishing a trust fund to honor her work. The fund would provide education scholarships for refugees and their descendants, and he hoped that someday Elizabeth's family would continue this mission of helping others in need. Martha realized with growing amazement that she was now the sole surviving member of Elizabeth's family line, the unexpected inheritor of this remarkable legacy. The papers included information about the trust fund, which had grown substantially over the decades. As the designated beneficiary, she now had the resources and responsibility to continue Elizabeth's work of helping refugees and displaced families. The final document in the envelope was a letter addressed directly to Elizabeth's family, to be opened when the time is right. The handwriting belonged to the same David Rosenberg, who had established the trust fund. The letter read, "To the family of Elizabeth Henley, if you are reading this, then the time has come to reveal a secret that has been hidden for too long. Your mother, grandmother, or ancestor was a hero who risked everything to save innocent lives during the war. She asked that her story remain secret to protect those she helped, but enough time has passed that the truth can now be told. Elizabeth Henley saved my family's lives and the lives of dozens of others. She turned her farm into a sanctuary when the world had gone mad with hatred and violence. She fed us when we were hungry, sheltered us when we were homeless, and gave us hope when we had lost everything. The trust fund I established has been waiting for someone from her family to claim it and continue her work. There are still refugees in this world, still families fleeing persecution and seeking safety. Elizabeth always said that kindness was like a seed, Plant it in one place and it grows everywhere. I pray that her family will accept this responsibility and continue planting seeds of kindness for future generations. The world needs Elizabeth's spirit now, as much as it did in 1943. Martha sat in the small room for a long time, absorbing the magnitude of what she had discovered. Her mother-in-law had been part of something extraordinary, a secret network of courage that saved countless lives. Harold had never known the full truth about his mother's wartime activities, though Martha now understood some of his childhood memories in a new light. She remembered Harold once mentioning that strangers sometimes stayed at their farm when he was young, people who spoke different languages and seemed frightened. Elizabeth had told him they were distant relatives visiting from back east. Now Martha realized these had been refugees finding temporary safety on their journey to new lives. When Martha finally emerged from the viewing room, she felt transformed by what she had learned. The bank officer helped her arrange for the safe return of the documents to the deposit box, but she kept copies of the trust fund information and David Rosenberg's letter. She had decisions to make about how to honor Elizabeth's legacy. Outside the bank, Thomas Brennan waited on the sidewalk, his expression anxious and concerned. Martha walked directly to him, no longer the uncertain widow who had entered the bank hours earlier. "Mr. Brennan," she said firmly, "I understand now why you were worried about me opening that box, but I think you were wrong to try to discourage me." The lawyer studied her face, noting the change in her demeanor. "Mrs. Henley, what did you find in there?" Martha smiled, an expression of quiet pride and determination. "I found my purpose, Mr. Brennan. I found the reason I was meant to survive Harold's death and live alone on that farm." Elizabeth Henley was a hero, and it's time her story was told. Thomas Brennan looked genuinely surprised by her response. "Mrs. Henley, there could be complications if that information becomes public. Some people in this county have spent decades trying to forget those old arrangements. There could be legal issues, political ramifications." "Mr. Brennan," Martha interrupted gently. "Some things are more important than convenience or politics. Elizabeth Henley saved lives when it mattered most. I intend to make sure her sacrifice is remembered and her work continued." The lawyer remained silent for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Mrs. Henley, I think I misjudged you. Perhaps you're exactly the right person to inherit this responsibility." Martha walked back to her truck with purpose in her step and Elizabeth's letter carefully tucked in her purse. The drive home passed quickly as she made plans for honoring her mother-in-law's legacy. She would establish a foundation to help modern refugees, create a scholarship program, and ensure that Elizabeth's story of courage was preserved for future generations. As the sun set over the prairie, painting the wheat fields in shades of gold and amber, Martha realized that her loneliness had transformed into something entirely different. She was no longer just a widow maintaining an empty farmhouse. She was the keeper of an extraordinary family legacy, the guardian of a story that needed to be told, and a mission that needed to continue. The key that had unlocked so many secrets now rested safely in her jewelry box, next to Harold's wedding ring. Tomorrow she would begin the work of continuing Elizabeth's mission, of planting seeds of kindness in a world that still needed heroes. Martha smiled as she prepared for bed, knowing that she would never be truly alone again. She carried the courage and compassion of the generations that came before her, and that was enough to light her way forward into whatever challenges lay ahead. The lonely widow had indeed turned the key, and far from regretting it, she had found her calling.